On the surface, Jacob's Well is mesmerizing. A deep blue spring nestled in the Texas Hill Country. Its waters shimmer under the sun, drawing swimmers and sightseers year-round. But hidden beneath this beauty is something far more sinister. What most people see is just an entrance, a circular mouth into a vast, mysterious system that extends nearly a kilometer below the surface. It's connected to a massive underground aquifer called the Trinity Aquifer, which constantly pushes out around 640 liters of water per second. This is what gives Jacob's Well its pristine clarity and allure. But that constant flow also hides its dangers. Over the years, this spot has earned a chilling reputation. Divers speak of tight passageways, shifting rocks, and water so still it masks its own depth. At least 9 lives have been lost exploring the treacherous chambers beneath Jacob's Well, and one particular incident from 1976 still stands as one of the most baffling underwater tragedies in American diving history. It was the night of September 9, 1976, when a group of 20 friends decided to camp near Jacob's Well. Among them were 3 adventurous divers: Kent Morfin, Mark Brashear, and Joe Moy. Unlike most, their curiosity didn't end at swimming near the surface. They were experienced divers. Kent and Mark, in particular, had explored Jacob's Well before. This time, though, the plan was different. They wanted to reach the real depth of the well, and they wanted to do it at midnight. Why midnight? Because at that hour, the riverbed would be deserted, the water calmer, and no one would see them enter. It was all about pushing limits, exploring what no one else dared to. Now, Jacob's Well isn't just a vertical shaft. It's an intricate labyrinth of chambers. The deeper one goes, the narrower and more complex it becomes. At around 25 feet below, the first chamber opens up. Then comes a horizontal corridor leading westward to the second. A further drop of 55 feet brings divers to the third chamber, which dips diagonally to about 75 feet deep. This is where things begin to get extremely dangerous. Between the third and fourth chambers lies the most intimidating part of the entire cave system, a 15-inch wide opening. It's so tight that divers have to remove their tanks, push them forward, and wiggle through the hole themselves. There were rumors swirling among the diving community. Some claimed the path beyond was a dead end. Others believed it led to an undiscovered chamber, larger and more mysterious than any previously mapped. Kent had heard these stories. He also knew that at least 4 divers had entered this passage before and never returned. But he wasn't the type to be scared off by rumors. The possibility of discovering a new chamber was too tempting. And so, as midnight approached, Kent and Mark suited up. Around 12:30 a.m., the duo entered the well. Joe Moy, the third diver, stayed above for observation. Kent and Mark had steel tanks strapped on, smaller in air capacity than the aluminum ones Joe was using, but that didn't seem to worry them. They were confident and determined. As they descended past the first and second chambers, they reached the notorious narrow opening. Despite no discussion about it earlier, they began removing their tanks. What's more shocking, they had no backup lights, no safety line, and no clear communication plan. Joe, waiting at the edge of the third chamber, saw a flicker of their lights disappearing through the tiny hole. Then, nothing. Kent and Mark vanished into the cave, almost like the water had swallowed them whole. Joe, now deeply concerned, noticed something else. His air was running low, and he knew their situation was worse. The deeper the dive, the faster the air consumption. And Kent and Mark were descending rapidly with tanks already low in capacity. Realizing things could spiral into disaster, Joe tried a desperate move. He took out his dive knife and hit the side of his tank, creating a loud metal clank in the water. It was a final signal, hoping the sound would reach his friends. Then he tossed his dive light through the narrow opening in one last attempt to guide them back. There was no response. Joe surfaced, unsure whether Kent and Mark were still alive. What began as a hopeful dive quickly turned into a nightmare. Hours passed with no sign of the missing divers. It became painfully clear this was no longer a rescue mission, but a body recovery operation. Leading the charge was Don Dibble, a former Navy diver and one of the most respected cave diving experts in Texas. When Don arrived at the site, it was pitch dark. His instincts told him to wait until daylight. A rule of thumb in cave diving: recover the lost when visibility is optimal. However, before dawn could even begin, an unnamed diver, described as incredibly brave, made two back-to-back 19-minute dives deep into the system trying to find Kent and Mark. Such back-to-back dives are highly risky due to nitrogen buildup and pressure changes. Unsurprisingly, the diver began suffering from decompression sickness and had to be rushed to a recompression chamber for treatment. This just highlighted how unforgiving Jacob's Well really was. It wasn't just about bravery, it required calculated precision, and still, it often wasn't enough. Don Dibble, now taking over the operation, sent 2 divers into the system, but their efforts were stalled. The opening to the 4th chamber, the path Kent and Mark had taken, was blocked by collapsed rocks. It wasn't just dangerous anymore, it was nearly inaccessible. The next morning, around 10 a.m., Don led his full team into the well. They began clearing rocks from the narrow passage, but every stone they removed seemed to be replaced by another. The entire cave seemed alive, constantly shifting, resisting their efforts. Eventually, after hours of struggle, Don made it through to the 4th chamber. He'd set a safety line beforehand, as protocol. Upon entering, he scanned the ceilings, walls, and the floor, looking for any sign of the missing divers. But there was nothing. Just silence, stone, and deep water. Then, disaster struck. Don felt it before he saw it. A slight vibration in the water, then a shift in pressure. The rocks above him were starting to slide, and then a sudden collapse. He was pinned. Both his arms were trapped beneath heavy stones, and the area filled with silt, blinding him completely. His safety line detached. He couldn't move, couldn't signal, could barely breathe. His air consumption spiked. Panic set in. He tried to inhale, but the regulator gave no response. Desperate, he ripped it out and began gulping at the surrounding water in a futile panic. Just when it seemed over, Don jerked violently, freeing both his arms in one burst of adrenaline. Miraculously, his teammate Calvin arrived at that exact moment and shoved a spare regulator into Don's mouth. He was breathing again, but the danger wasn't over. The sudden gulp of compressed air at a depth of 140 feet had a terrifying consequence. As Don and Calvin began ascending, the pressure dropped, and the air in Don's stomach began to expand rapidly. By the time he surfaced, his stomach had ballooned like a 9-month pregnant woman. He was in agony. At the Brook Medical Hospital, surgeons had to perform emergency surgery. His stomach had torn open from the internal pressure. Doctors later said, cutting into it felt like slicing into a fully inflated basketball. While Don was in recovery, Kent and Mark were still missing. And the cave had now taken more than just lives. It had nearly taken a rescuer too. As days passed, the rescue teams tried to dig deeper, but the 4th chamber's entrance kept collapsing in on itself. Rocks would slide down constantly, blocking the way each time progress was made. Over 20 divers worked relentlessly. Stones were tied in mesh bags and hauled up one by one. It was back-breaking, dangerous work. Everyone hoped the bodies could be recovered soon, but funds were running low. The park department and Kent's family began to clash. Tensions rose. The original dive company had run out of resources. Eventually, donations were sought to continue, but they still weren't enough. Then, a new player entered the scene. The Schaefer Diving Company, a non-profit rescue diving group, took over. Led by Louis Schaefer, they came armed with advanced gear, vacuum systems, decompression chambers, communication lines, and more. They were confident. Louis even told the media, "It's easy, we'll get Kent and Mark out." They began setup at the 4th chamber's entrance, rigging air supply systems and communication nets. Stones were removed using netting that allowed them to float up easily. The operation cost around $55,000, with $500 a day in running costs. But there was a fatal flaw. The cave walls were too unstable. Every time they made progress, more stones fell. On the 5th day, 2 massive boulders tumbled into the passage, making it almost impossible to continue. Eventually, the funds dried up. Lewis's right-hand man, Will Wright, held a press conference. He said they could no longer continue for free. The mission had to be shut down. Kent and Mark's bodies would remain in the cave forever. After 12 days of relentless effort, the recovery was officially declared closed. Jacob's Well had claimed them. A week later, Don Dibble, now recovered, returned with his team. A metal grate was installed at a specific depth. The cave was sealed. A warning sign was placed above it that read, "You can't keep us out." But tragically, even that wasn't enough. 4 years later, 2 more people would lose their lives in the same cave. A story for another time. It wasn't until 21 years later that Kent's remains were finally found. During a mapping project led by archaeologists, skeletal remains were discovered deep inside the well. After 2 decades, the cave had finally revealed one of its secrets. Today, Jacob's Well is still open to the public. Diving is allowed, but only up to a certain depth without a permit. For those daring enough to venture beyond, the risk remains chillingly clear. Go deep enough, and the cave may not let go. Jacob's Well is a place of beauty and of horror. It has lured explorers, challenged professionals, and taken lives. The story of Kent Morphin and Mark Brashear is a sobering reminder that nature doesn't care about bravery or experience. It demands respect, and sometimes the price for underestimating it is too high. If this story gave chills and sparked curiosity, consider subscribing for more mysterious, true, and visually gripping stories like this one. And remember, not everything that sparkles beneath the surface is safe.